Welcome back to Echo Ridge and our second episode in our Ultimate Beginner's Guide. Today, we are definitely going to unpause the game. I promise. Maybe. At the end of the last episode, we had just finished coming into the colony and started to look around. Now, we need to start figuring out where we're going to build and dig to first. In order to do that, we're going to make use of some of these overlays. The first one we're going to look at is the oxygen overlay. The oxygen overlay tells you where it's breathable and where it's unbreathable. And it sort of helps here in the beginning game to find out what caverns have the most oxygen in them. For instance, this cavern down here looks like it has a decent amount of oxygen. That may play into our decision factor of where we're going to dig to. Whereas to the northwest, we have a little bit of carbon dioxide mixed in with the oxygen. This is not as opportune. Because remember, this one tile worth of oxygen has 1,544 grams worth of oxygen in it. Well, our friend Pei here is breathing 100 grams per second. So this one tile is only going to last for 15 seconds. This one, another 15. But it's not like the duplicant can only breathe the oxygen from here, because when 100 grams of oxygen is lost here, the rest of the area sort of equalizes and reduces the whole area by about 100, at least over time. Now this was the first mention of the word seconds. So this is a good point to explain what a cycle is. A cycle is what we would consider a day. Each cycle in oxygen not included lasts for 600 seconds. I don't mean the 600 seconds in real time, rather I mean it in duplicant time. So Pei is breathing 100 grams per second, and we'll do that for each second in a 600 second cycle. And this is where I'm going to explain to you that the game's title is a big smelly liar. Because not only is oxygen included in this cavern here, but they also give us continuous oxygen in form of this oxalite. If we go ahead and unpause just for a minute, you can see every once in a while the oxalite is emitting more oxygen. And it'll do this at an expense to its mass. Notice the mass is going down as it's emitting more oxygen. What this essentially means is the situation isn't quite as dire, because while yes, we're in a cavern that has a limited amount of oxygen, this oxalite here is releasing more, at least for the time being. Take note that the oxalite is only going to be releasing oxygen where it's exposed to the environment. These pieces of oxalite are not releasing any because, well, they're not exposed. They're blocked in by sandstone, sand, and more oxalite. With that being said, we still don't have all the time in the world to just sit inside our little hole. The other thing you want to look for is water. And this is going to introduce you to the materials overlay. When we click on the materials overlay, it can be a bit overwhelming because it's set on showing you all the materials. Most materials in the game have a differentiating color to sort of help separate them from all the other materials. But right now, I want you to be concerned with liquid. We're going to click on the liquid overlay and try to find out where all of our water is. Now, you don't necessarily need to look at the liquid overlay to be able to see it, but I also want to be able to highlight the different materials overlay that may factor into your decisions of where we're going to be digging and building to. So we know that we have water over here and we have water over here. That is going to heavily influence where we're going to dig to, for the simple reason we need water. Water sort of sustains life. Maybe not in the very beginning here because we have oxalite, we have our nutrient bars, but eventually we're going to need to make more oxygen and more food, and one of the ways we can do that is with liquid water. More immediately though, it's to fill up the sinks so the duplicants can wash their hands. Okay, Echo, well, I'm just going to start digging. Be careful. Note that these locations are pretty far away, so we have a decision on whether or not we want to dig down or we want to dig horizontally. In the beginning, I recommend that you're going to dig horizontally for one specific reason, and that is carbon dioxide. Remember I told you these duplicants were exhaling carbon dioxide. Well, if you just start digging down, the carbon dioxide, being heavier than oxygen, is going to follow down with you. And that's sort of a good thing when we're trying to store all that carbon dioxide. We're trying to get it away from our base. We'll make sort of a carbon sink or a hole down here for all the carbon dioxide to sink to. But if we were to start digging all the way down here, our duplicants would have to consistently go back up, get some oxygen, and then start digging again, which might slow you down. So to start with, we're going to dig over to this side, and there's two methods you can do to use it. One is just hitting the G key and then dragging. The other is clicking this little dig tool down here in the bottom right, which is going to bring us to our first lesson on the tools. All the things down here are the items that you can control as a printing pod. You can set dig commands, you can cancel the commands, you can set deconstruct commands to destroy buildings, and so on and so forth. Each time you click one of these commands, a priority meter pops up. And we'll get into priorities a lot more later. Just know that 5 is sort of the standard priority. But if I were to set some dig commands going this way at a priority of 6, the duplicants would want to dig this area out before they dug this area out because we set this priority at 5. And an easy way to see your priorities is by use of the P key or by hitting the priority tool. And here we can see our digging priority set at 5 and our digging priority set at 6. For now, we'll cancel these by using the C key or the cancel tool. Let's go ahead and unpause for the very first time and allow the duplicants to start digging. Now notice there is only 2 duplicants at work. One of the duplicants is idle. Why are they idle? Well, because they can't reach any of the dig commands. This cavern is only 2 wide, and so it only takes 2 dig commands at once. Whenever Pay finds something to do, they do it. For instance, they just found a little bit of muckroot and decided to come drop it off here at the ration box. This is an important tip in the beginning of the game because there are critters that will eat your muckroot, so you want to store them in the safety of your ration box. So make sure by clicking on the ration box, you have all the edibles selected. But we don't want one of the duplicants to be not busy, so we're actually going to set those dig commands over here to give us a little bit more room. And that way now all the duplicants have something to do. Another thing I wanted to highlight is all this debris that is starting to form from the dig commands being completed. Notice right now this is 1,000 kilos worth of sandstone. There's also 495 kilos of sandstone debris sitting on top. The reason why is because this tile here used to be sandstone until it was dug up. Once that happens, you lose 50% of the mass. So this 1,000 kilos worth of sandstone is going to become 500 kilos worth of sandstone. The other sandstone falls on top of it, and it joins into one pile of debris. As another highlight, here's our 975 kilos worth of sandstone, and now it is 487 kilos. And that point is important because as we're digging, a bunch of these icons started highlighting. And the reason why is because we now have things we can build using our newly found debris. Here we could build a ladder that would cost us 100 sandstone. Why sandstone? Because the ladders can only be built out of raw minerals. The same thing with tiles and storage bins. These pneumatic doors, though, say they're missing a resource, metal ores. Well, if I wanted to build one of these doors, which we will in a little while, and I'm like, okay, where is the metal ores? We can quickly see some because it's sort of shiny. The copper ore here in its tooltip says it is a metal ore. We can also highlight this fact by going back to our friend Materials Overlay by clicking this icon or hitting the F4 key and then selecting metal. And now all that's highlighting are the tiles that have metal in them. We want access to this water. That will become more evident why here in a minute. Luckily for us, in our plumbing tool, we now have a new building called the pitcher pump. The pitcher pump is a building that acts as a well. Unfortunately, if we built it up here, notice the little spout doesn't appear. The reason why is there's solid tiles in the way. But if we built it here, notice the spout has access to that water. We don't want to build it this high though, because we'd use that amount of water fairly quickly and then we'd have to rebuild the pitcher pump. So we're actually going to go down to, say, here. And what we can do to get access to that is dig this one up and these two up. Now the duplicants will be able to use these tiles as sort of a staircase and gain access to be able to not only build the pitcher pump, but also to use it, because the pitcher pump itself is a platform. Notice what happened there though, that we lost a lot of the materials down here. As we dug these tiles, everything sort of fell. But now we have a wonderful pitcher pump, and it has 5.9 tons of water available. Great news for us. What are we going to do with it? Well, to start off with, nothing. We're just going to keep digging because we want an area to be able to put our bathrooms. And because I know our bathrooms are going to be 3 tiles high to start with, we need to dig these. But I wanted to highlight what happens when you dig a tile out that above it is sitting sand. Notice the sand just sort of falls and then makes a new tile. That is an important aspect because you can bury duplicates and trap them if you're not very careful. But now that we have this area sort of dug out, we'll be able to use another new building, and that's the outhouse. We're going to put one outhouse down here, one outhouse down here, and then follow it up by a couple of sinks. And that'll become evident why in a minute. Our first outhouse is complete. Notice it has 15 visits remaining. Why? Because a duplicant took the time to drop off 200 kilos worth of dirt. Now, it doesn't take 200 kilos worth of dirt to use the bathroom, but if we go to our database by clicking on the outhouse button, we can see that it requires 13 kilos of dirt per use. And what we're going to be given back is 19.7 kilos worth of polluted dirt. It also is going to create 200,000 food poisoning germs per use. That's the reason why we put in the sinks. Because the sinks, as it's described, remove 120,000 germs per use. Now, because the 200,000 germs per use is greater than the 120, you're going to think to yourself, well, that's not enough. We need to get rid of more germs. But the germs that it's creating are going to stay on the outhouse. And by using the outhouse, the duplicates are going to pick up a little bit of germs. And then when they pass the wash basin, they're going to wash their hands and get rid of some of the germs. In fact, they're going to be getting rid of 120,000 germs per use. So the sinks are able to take care of all the germs. A couple of other things we're going to highlight about the outhouses and the wash basin. The outhouse, with it being loaded up with 200 kilos worth of dirt, has a little meter here that says it has 15 visits remaining. Once we get done using the outhouse 15 times, it's going to need to be cleaned, and more dirt is going to need to be dropped off. These are errands. And as you can see by clicking on the outhouse's errands, it has 2 available. First one, for duplicates to be able to go to the bathroom, and another one that says downtime, use toilet. This is a schedule-based errand. We'll get into more of those later. But it basically is saying nobody's bladder is full, so they don't have to use the outhouse, and it's not somebody's downtime, so they're not going to try to empty their bladder or use the bathroom just in case. Sort of in the way that your parents used to tell you before a road trip, make sure you use the bathroom before we get in the car. Another errand will pop up when it's time for the outhouse to be cleaned. We'll get more into those errands later. Also a note, you can assign an outhouse to one dupe or another. But by doing that, now this one can only be used to bubbles. We don't want to do that. We want everybody to be able to use these potties. So we'll reassign it back to public. On the wash basin, notice the tooltip is saying it requires 200 kilos worth of water. Same goes for its information pane that's saying it's still waiting for water. This is causing it to queue up an errand. Bubbles has been assigned this errand. And if we look over here, Bubbles already went and got the water from the pitcher pump and is going to drop it off at this wash basin. This wash basin that was just completed does not have the errand yet because it was just built. But if we unpause it, notice the errand pops, and we can see that Catalina was assigned the errand. Right now, we have 2 duplicates working, and 1 is idle. Pay doesn't have anything to do. Catalina is going to grab some of the water from the pitcher pump, and then drops it off here in this wash basin. Now, right now, the duplicates don't have any germs. But with these wash basins set up, if we were to move Catalina over here, they're not going to do anything. But if they had germs on them, they would stop and wash their hands. Well, a properly run colony is not going to have any germs on the outside of the bathrooms. We can see this by clicking on the germ overlay. Notice there's a bunch of flower scent germs here, but that's sort of it. After a little while, these outhouses are going to have a lot of germs. It's for this reason we don't need the wash basins to be set on both directions. In other words, telling the duplicates to use them, no matter if they're going this way or that, so it doesn't hurt to just set them to only use them if they're heading from right to left. With that being said, there's nothing wrong with you leaving them on both directions, just in case your duplicate does manage to get some food poisoning germs. Although, if they're going to be passing this way, they're going to be going to the bathroom and then washing their hands before they leave anyways. It's for this reason you normally put your bathrooms in a dead-end sort of corridor. That way, they have to come in this way and they have to leave this way. Kind of makes it look like its own little room, doesn't it? Ha ha! Great little segue, wasn't it? This is going to bring us up to our room overlay. Oxygen Not Included has the ability to create a bunch of rooms. And by clicking on the room overlay, you'll be able to see what each of them does. It just so happens that one of them is called the latrine. If we are able to make a latrine, we're going to be given +1 morale anytime a duplicate uses said latrine. Alright, Echo, that sounds like a good thing. I know my duplicates are going to need morale. So what do I need to do to make a latrine? Well, each room overlay description has its requirements. The latrine requires a toilet, a wash station, no industrial machine, and it has a minimum size of 12 tiles and a maximum size of 64 tiles. Well, let's check that out. I don't see any industrial machines because we only have a wash basin and an outhouse, which, by the way, check the boxes for the latrine. Our latrine itself is what looks to be 32 total tiles, minus these 2 because we haven't dug them up. We'll do so just because I know we're going to need this algae soon anyways. So now we know the room is exactly 32 tiles. So all we would need to do to make this a room is put a door on it. But once again, we don't have any metal ore. Let's go dig up a little bit of the copper ore right here. But I wanted you to notice that this tile says it has a buried object. The buried object is literally something that is beneath or behind this tile that can't escape. And in this case, it happens to be a little bit of muckroot. So Catalina is going to grab some of that muckroot and put it in the ration box. Notice we're now up to 19,200 calories because of the additional muckroot. But now we have a little bit of copper ore. And you may have heard the little ding because when we go into our base buildings, the pneumatic door is now highlighted, as in we are now able to build it. Now, the pneumatic door is sort of like a screen door. It opens, it closes, but it does not prevent liquid or gases from going through it. What it will prevent is critters. And I know we haven't found our first critter, but when we do, know that they will not be able to go through the door, unless, of course, they can hop over it. Alright, so we put a door. Now we should clearly have a room, right? Nothing's happening, Echo. In fact, it says this size is still 206 tiles. And it's because we have not closed this in. We could do this by a couple of methods. One, we could put a tile right here, which we will do. The duplicate drops off 200 kilos worth of sandstone. And finally, we now have a room that's highlighted in the room overlay. And when we highlight over it, when we're in the room overlay, we can see that this is a latrine and it's providing us a +1 to morale bonus. It also says that the room size is 32 tiles, as we had planned, in that there are 4 total buildings in it. Well, that's great. We have our first room. But I also wanted to give you a bit of strategy. Nothing's to say that instead of using a tile, you couldn't just have used another pneumatic door. In fact, if we would have remembered not to dig out this tile, it also would have counted. You just have to close up the room. In fact, you don't even have to put a door here. We could have closed up the room by just using 3 tiles, and it still would have counted as a latrine. The duplicants wouldn't have been able to get in it, but you get my point. Alright, Echo, it looks like we've sort of won the game. We have oxygen, we have food, and now we have bathrooms so the duplicants aren't going to pee themselves. Except right now, they don't have anywhere to sleep. So before our duplicants get tired, I think this is a good point to start showing you the schedule. Notice there's a bunch of buttons up here in the top left. One of them is the schedule. And this once again has a little bit to unpack. Notice the little triangle here that indicates where we are in the current cycle. It's the same caret that's on top of this little planetoid here. If we unpause it, we can see that it's slowly moving. Once this little arrow reaches this area here, it will be the default night time in the colony. For our dupes in their schedule, they're about to go into downtime and then into bedtime. Don't let that be confused with nighttime versus daytime. Because if we click the add a new schedule, and then we get rid of any sort of bedtime or daytime, notice it still says that these 3 slots here are nighttime, and these 5 slots are the morning time. This icon here indicates that pay is the early bird. So remember from last episode, they were getting +2 to all of their attributes when it was during this time, which once again can be highlighted about where this triangle is or where you are on the cycle meter up here. While we're in here, we're going to build a second schedule. In order to do that, you have to start with a new schedule by clicking the button that we did and then assigning someone to it. In this case, we're going to assign pay, because remember, pay gets +2 attributes in the morning, so the more that they can work during the morning, the better. Whereas up here, we can see that they have a bath time scheduled right during the middle of the morning, and we don't necessarily want to do that. Now, the 4 things that you can put on a schedule are bath time, work, downtime, and bedtime. In the bath time, if a duplicant needs to use the bathroom, they'll go and do that. They'll also use the shower or go wash their hands. Work time is whenever they're going to be free to do all the errands, such as the digging and building that we've already been doing. The downtime is their non-working hours. If you have recreation buildings, they'll go use them during this time. Right now in the beginning, they'll just sort of stand around with their hands in the pockets. Note that the more downtime you have assigned, the more morale they're going to receive for that downtime. It maxes out at 4 morale, which can be achieved by giving them 5 downtime slots. We're only going to start with 2 downtime slots, which will give them a +1 morale. Additionally, during their downtime, if they're hungry, they're going to go eat. This is not to say that they won't eat through the rest of the schedule, because if you remove all their downtime, they'll just wait till they're hungry and then they'll just stop working and go eat. So it's good to have the downtime in your schedule. And then finally, bedtime is sort of self-descriptive. That's when they're going to go to sleep. The one important point about bedtime is they're going to continuously sleep as long as you have bedtime until they're fully rested, and then they're going to naturally wake up. For this reason, some people like to put only 2 bedtime slots, because even though a duplicant is working throughout the day, they'll get enough of their stamina recovery in the 2 bedtime slots, and it'll last them the whole day until their next bedtime. I like to keep it at 3 because they're going to get up when they're fully rested anyways. So to build Pay's new slot, we're just going to throw in a few bedtime slots, a few downtime slots, and then a bath time right after they wake up. But there's nothing to say you can't put a bath time, say, in the middle, or multiple sleep times throughout the day. I'm only sort of showing you best practices, but feel free to play around with it. In this pane, you also have the ability to set an alarm whenever this shift starts, along with deleting the entire schedule, and you can also rename it. I like to name them based off their shift number. Shift 1, Shift 2. Notice that Shift 1 has the alarm checked. And you sort of want to leave one alarm on, that way, as the game's going on, you can keep track of when it is in the day using an audible feature. So why did we decide to make a new shift? Well, in this case, 2 reasons. 1, we wanted Pei to be able to work during all the early bird hours. But 2, we only have 2 bathrooms. And if all the duplicants were on the same shifts, they would all try to go use the outhouse at once, which could sort of backfire on you if the duplicant has to use the bathroom and there are no available bathrooms. Now, Bubbles and Catalina are eating first. Why? Because they're in their downtime. Pei is now in their bedtime because we moved their shift around. Hence the reason they're sleeping on the floor. But I wanted to highlight what's happening as the duplicants are eating. Notice they're gaining the calories from the food, which is sort of filling their little tummies back up. It does not matter how hungry they are, they will always eat 1,000 calories per cycle if that much is available. Pei, unfortunately, did not get a meal today because they were sleeping. But notice they're using the bathroom right there during their bathroom time. Tomorrow, though, when it comes all the way back around, they're going to use their bath time here. So what's the deal with the bath time slot? Well, they can also use it to take showers, or if you decide to put a different bath time slot, they'll then use the bathroom then. Pei is very happy about using the bathroom. Notice their tooltip says Disinfecting Outhouse. Under the germ overlay, we can now see that because everybody was using the outhouses, there's a lot of germs. Well, the overlay itself has an automatic errand trigger that says, hey, clean anything that has more than 10,000 germs. Some people like to turn these off because there's not going to be any germs in here other than the outhouses. For safety measures, I like to leave it on because there's a chance that a duplicant's going to get a germ from somewhere else and then touch a building, and then it'll need to be disinfected. But watch what happens when Pei gets done disinfecting the outhouses and we give them something to do by moving them over. They stop and wash their hands. The germ overlay right now says Pei has 11,200 germs and now they don't have any. And it's for that reason it doesn't matter if the outhouses, if they're in this setup, have a bunch of germs on them. So we don't want to waste duplicant labor, and that's a key term we're going to touch on later in the series, on disinfecting outhouses, so we can click the Disable Disinfect on each of the outhouses. Now, they will no longer get the errand to go and disinfect them. Something else to highlight is Pei, and soon-to-be Catalina and Bubbles, now have a sore back. The reason why they have a sore back is because they slept on the floor. The sore back debuff gives them a -1 to athletics, and it lasts for a half a cycle. This is where we're going to start highlighting some of our attributes. Notice when we go to Pei's skills, their total athletics is now -1 because of the sore back debuff, which is giving them a -10% to run speed. These sort of debuffs can stack and will be how you get yourself in trouble in the early game. So why don't we go ahead and take care of that sore back by giving the duplicants some place to sleep. We don't have a lot of room unless we wanted to build it in this hallway, so why don't we build up and down? Well, I know we can dig up, but how are we going to get up? Well, we saw it earlier, and that's by use of the ladder. We're going to put some ladders here and tell the duplicants to keep building ladders. Notice, though, Catalina is the only one that's basically doing an errand. Why? Because there was only one ladder to be built until the other one got exposed. In these build commands, there's sort of 3 potential errands. 1, to dig out the sandstone tile behind it, which has to be done. We then have to load the materials needed to build the ladder. Right now, this construction is filled with 100 kilos worth of sandstone, so they got the next errand, which was to build it. And this will continuously happen. Dig, drop off the materials, and then build it. Notice that as soon as you get the blueprint, the duplicants can drop off the materials, even though it hasn't been dug up yet. Pei is grabbing the sandstone right now and then dropping it off into the blueprint. Then they're going to try to dig it, and then they'll build it. We don't want to dig that up, so we're just going to cancel it. Now we've built up a little bit further, so we have a little bit of room that we can build some beds in. In this case, we're going to be using cots because, well, they're all we have available to us. So let's go ahead and put down 3 cots right next to each other. That way, in case the duplicants want to chit-chat before they go to sleep. And just like the ladders, they're going to drop off the materials for the cot, 200 kilos, and then they're going to dig out all the tiles behind it, and then somebody's going to start building the cots. This is going to give us our second room. By going into the room overlay, if we go down to the barracks, you can see that we can get another +1 to morale for the duplicants sleeping in a barracks. All it takes is 1 or more beds, minimum size of 12, and a max size of 64. So, let's just build a door. Now, in order to build a door that way, I just selected a previous door and then hit the B key, which copies that building and put it down. The duplicant's going to go grab some copper ore, drop it off, and once that is complete, we now have a barracks to go along with our latrine. We are doing absolutely amazing. This will bring us our next point on morale. When we go to the skills button, it brings up all the duplicants' skills. While they don't have any skill points yet, as you can see, Catalina here only has 714 experience, but they need 3,038 to get their first skill point. This is still an excellent screen to look at morale. As you can see, Catalina's morale is a 3. They're getting +1 for just being a duplicant. They're getting +1 because of that new hope buff that we showed you earlier. They're getting +1 for the new shift break, and then they're losing 1 for having a grisly meal. They also have a 0 morale need, and we'll get more into that when we start assigning skill points. But it's important to note, the more morale, the better. And that's going to lead into the last room we're going to be building today, and that is going to be the mess hall. Our mess hall is another way to get a morale bonus, except this time it's a giant +3 to morale. It has a minimum size of 12 and a max size of 64, and requires a mess table. Well, when I click down in furniture, I don't see any mess tables. Why is that? That's because you don't have access to it until you research it. And you can't even get into the research tab until you build your first research building, which is found under stations and requires 400 kilos worth of metal ore. But that is going to have to wait for episode number 3. Like I said at the beginning of this series, we're going to be going very, very slow and going over the absolute basics. So I know the pacing isn't for everyone, but if you're enjoying this series, please let me know down in the comments below. And also, maybe let me know what section of the game you're looking forward to me discussing, because eventually we're going to get to pretty much all of them. So until next time, happy gaming, and I'll talk to you soon.